Now, here in France, the National Assembly has approved a bill adding the concept of non consent to the legal definition of rape. The proposal, supported by most parties except the far right, now awaits final approval by the Senate. The law defines all sexual acts without consent as assault and clarifies that silence cannot imply agreement. It marks the culmination of 2 years of parliamentary work and follows the high profile rape case last year of Gisele Pelicot. We can now bring in Yéléna Mandengué, lawyer and feminist activist. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. In your opinion, does this bill go far enough?
With I'm an activist in Nutut, and we have been fighting for the implementation of consent in the law. So for us, it's a huge victory, of course. It's a first step to erase the culture of rape in our society. So, of course, it's really good, and we feel like it's a first win. Of course, law is not enough to erase rape culture, and we still have more fight and more steps to climb, but still.
How does the inclusion of non-consent in the legal definition of rape change the way such cases will be treated going forward?
One of the things that we raise alert in Nutut is, for example, you talk about Gisele Pelicot case. In this case, we had the lawyers of the rapist that was saying like, oh, okay, maybe there was a sexual act, but we weren't able to prove that the rapist had the intention to rape. So it was something around that, and
even
it
though
was
she was lying there unconscious.
But there were like the sexual act is the thing, but we have to prove intention, and that's because the legal definition of rape wasn't large enough before. We just had to prove like it was supposed to be like there was a presumption of consent. It was like the sexual act is supposed to be consensual, and if it's not, it has to be with violence, with threat, or stuff like that. The thing that is changing now with the bill is that you assume that any sexual act have to have consent. So you have to prove that.
Does that mean verbal consent?
It means consent that can be, that's going to be challenged at court. The consent, it has to be shown before the sexual act. It has to be enlightening. So obviously, if someone is non-conscious, now there won't be this debate that happened in Gisele Pelicot case. If the law is put in place, it won't be able to apply because we will see that there is no consent. So that's why it's more large to see.
Yeah. Could this new law lead to more convictions? And do you see any challenges with it?
One of the things that we raise a lot in Nutut is that you have more than 80% of the plaints against rape and sexual aggression that led to nothing. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to put consent in the law for a police officer to be able to have more alert regarding consent. To be like, okay, now that we have consent in the law, like we have to check that everything was respected by the other person that is accused of rape. So we feel like maybe because of that, there's going to be less planes that are just left behind. But of course, in addition of the law, there needs to be training for police officer regarding consent, to be like, okay, consent is not only when it's verbal and you say yes to the sexual act. Sometimes you have relation of power that can make the consent less explicit.
I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but how does it work within a marriage, for instance?
Yeah. That's the thing, because most of sexual aggression and rapes happen in the closest relationships. So that's why it was important to add consent, because before it was rape was just, as I told you before, violence, threat, and everything. And it's harder to demonstrate when you're in situation of astonishment or a situation of power, when you have like psychological influence from a husband to the wife, for example, and you don't especially have violence, you don't especially have threats, but it can be in a psychological environment that leads to the rape. So that's why in a marriage, for example, of course it can happen.
Supporters of this bill say it marks a shift from a culture of rape to one of consent.
Yeah, of course.
What is this transformation going to look like on an everyday basis?
We feel like, for example, just having this talk is a good thing. Like the fact that that the consent is going to be put in the law, maybe is going to be able to raise conversation with people, and people are going to be like, okay, maybe now I have to think more about consent and not being like, okay, I'm going to get away with this. Like maybe I have to think what is consent to me. For example, in the Pelicot case, you had one of the rapists that were, he was 50 something, and he was like, before this case, I didn't know, nobody taught me what consent is. So that's one of the things that is.
That comes to my next question, because I remember in my first week when I did my bachelor's in the US, in orientation week, back then I remember they taught us no means no. I was, 18 at the time.
Yeah.
And it's a lesson that I just remember, because I remember we laughed, we joked, but it's a lesson that people remember and don't forget. Tell me what happens in France.
Yeah, that's actually a good question, because that's why the law is good, but we still have work to do. Because, for example, we have a law that is called EVARS law in France that is supposed to, every children is supposed to have at school lessons about sexual consent and sexual education. Of course, regarding of the age, it's different kind of classes, but it's like you have a number of mandatory courses about sexual education. It's a law that have been implemented in 2001, but right now it's not really put in place. Like the law exists, but people don't apply it. So that's why that's one of the work we have at NU to be like, okay, this law exists. It's important to raise awareness around that, and to have people that have sexual education, especially when you're children, for example, because that's how you know the culture of consent that you talked about.
Yéléna, we're going to have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
in and speaking to us.